If you can't respect her, then I don't think there's a place for you here." His voice came out steady but powerful, cutting through the tension like a blade. His words echoed in the quiet room. Every pair of eyes locked on him, and for the first time in his life, Jonah didn't feel the usual suffocating pressure to conform. The room went still, the silence profound, as if the very air around him held its breath. He wasn't just defending Zoe. No, this was bigger than that. Jonah wasn't just speaking for the company anymore. He wasn't even speaking for Zoe. He was speaking for himself. He was speaking for the man he had become through his relationship with her, the man who had learned to see beyond inherited biases, the man who had learned to embrace empathy and vulnerability. It was as if everything inside him had shifted. The years of arrogance, the judgments, the prejudices, he no longer wanted to carry them. He had found something more valuable. He had found Zoe. The silence that followed was deafening. Jonah could feel the weight of the moment, how it marked a turning point, not just for his business, but for the way he saw the world. There was no turning back now. His words had been spoken, and with them, he had thrown off the chains of societal expectations. The room was still, but in that silence, Jonah felt something lift off his chest, a weight he hadn't realized he'd been carrying for years. For the first time, he felt truly free. Hello, family, and welcome to Fiction Stories TV. If you love deeply emotional stories about love, loss, and unexpected reunions, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it with someone you care about. Don't forget to turn on your notifications so you never miss a new story from us. Your support truly means everything. Now, sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Jonah Hayes had always prided himself on being a self-made billionaire, a man who rose from humble beginnings through sheer grit and a relentless pursuit of success. In the eyes of the world, he was powerful, untouchable, and above reproach. His empire was vast, his influence unmatched. Yet, despite all his success, Jonah had never been able to shake the biases that had been ingrained in him since childhood. He had been raised in a world that viewed certain people, particularly Black women, as less than, as not worthy of the same respect or attention. Jonah never thought about it much. He lived his life according to the rules he had been taught, never questioning them, until Zoe Montgomery. Their first meeting had been at Arthur Langston's 50th birthday party. Jonah hadn't wanted to go. He found these events to be nothing more than networking opportunities, shallow, performative, and ultimately meaningless. But it was important for his business, so he had attended. That night, as he wandered through the crowd, his gaze fell on Zoe across the room. She stood out in a way Jonah couldn't explain. Her presence was magnetic, but it wasn't just her beauty that caught his attention. There was something about her, something in the way she carried herself that made everyone around her seem insignificant. She exuded confidence, grace, and a quiet strength that Jonah had never seen in any woman before. Zoe wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't looking for approval. She simply was. And that, Jonah realized, was what made her different from all the others in the room. Their conversation started off as business, typical, expected, but then something unexpected happened. As they talked, Jonah found himself captivated by her words. She didn't just talk about business. Zoe spoke with insight, passion, and a clarity that cut through the usual corporate jargon. And it wasn't just what she said, it was the way she said it. She challenged him without even trying. Challenged the way he thought about the world. Challenged the way he thought about people. The more Jonah listened, the more he realized how little he knew about the world outside of his own bubble. How little he understood about the challenges that people like Zoe had to face every day. She wasn't just a Black woman in a business suit. She was Zoe Montgomery, the CEO of Montgomery Global, a company with an international reach, known for its integrity, its ethics, and its commitment to diversity. And in that moment, Jonah felt something inside him begin to shift. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable. But as the night wore on, Jonah found himself thinking about her in ways he hadn't expected. He couldn't stop thinking about her even after the party ended. He didn't know what it was. Maybe it was the way she challenged him. Maybe it was the way she made him feel seen, not just as a billionaire, but as a man. And so began Jonah's internal conflict. On one hand, he was still the man he had always been, a man who had built everything he had through his own effort, a man who had been taught to value power, money, and status. But on the other hand, Zoe had shown him a world he had never truly understood, one where respect and equality mattered more than anything else. As Jonah wrestled with his feelings for Zoe, he found himself faced with a choice. Would he continue to adhere to the prejudices of his past, or would he allow himself to embrace the change that Zoe had sparked within him? If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more emotional stories about personal growth, love, and transformation. Let us know in the comments. Have you ever had a moment that changed your perspective on love or life? Share this video with someone who needs a little inspiration today. The next few days were a whirlwind for Jonah. The boardroom incident, though monumental, was only the beginning of his internal battle. He had defended Zoe, but deep down, he wasn't entirely sure if he had done it for the right reasons. Was it because of his growing respect for her, or had it been driven by something deeper, something personal that had nothing to do with business? He found himself replaying their conversations over and over in his mind. The way she spoke about inequality and racism without flinching. The way she didn't ask for anyone's approval, but commanded it anyway. She was everything Jonah had never been, unapologetically herself, confident in her skin and comfortable in her own identity. It was refreshing, and it unsettled him in a way he hadn't anticipated. His thoughts were interrupted one afternoon when Zoe showed up at his office unannounced. She walked in like she owned the place, her presence commanding, yet there was an air of casual confidence about her that made Jonah feel oddly at ease. "Hey," she greeted him with a smile that was more of an invitation than a pleasantry. "Got a minute?" Jonah stood from his desk, startled by how easily she moved through his space, how natural it felt to have her in his world. "Of course. Please sit." She perched herself on the edge of the chair. Her posture relaxed but poised. There was something about her that made Jonah feel as though he were the one who was being tested, even though she was the one under constant scrutiny. "I was thinking about the other night," Zoe began, her tone casual but carrying the weight of a deeper meaning. "You didn't have to stand up for me, Jonah. You could have stayed silent like everyone else, but you didn't, and I can't help but wonder what changed." Jonah hesitated, his fingers tapping on the desk as he searched for the right words. He wasn't used to being so open about his feelings, especially with someone like Zoe, someone who had come into his life like a storm and left him questioning everything he thought he knew. "I guess I just couldn't let it go," Jonah finally said, his voice low but sure. "It wasn't just about you. It was about me, too. About how I've lived my life, how I've let society dictate my beliefs without ever questioning them. I grew up in a world that told me certain people didn't belong in the spaces I occupy. And honestly, I let that be my reality for too long." Zoe looked at him, her gaze softening, but there was no judgment in her eyes, only understanding. "I get it," she said quietly. "I do, but the truth is, Jonah, you can't change the past. All we can do is choose what we do with the present." She leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with him. "I'm not asking you to change overnight, but you have to acknowledge that you've changed. You're not the same man who walked into this building a few weeks ago. I can see it." Jonah felt something shift in his chest at her words. For the first time in a long while, he felt seen, not for his wealth or his status, but for who he was becoming. It was a feeling he wasn't used to, but it was one he craved. "I don't know how to fix it all," Jonah admitted. "I don't know how to just forget the way I've been conditioned to think, but I know this. I want to learn. I want to understand what I didn't before. I don't want to be the person I was." Zoe's smile was small but genuine. "That's the first step. You're already on the path." The conversation lingered in Jonah's mind long after she left. It wasn't just about changing his views on race or gender. It was about shifting his entire perspective on life. Zoe had shown him that growth wasn't about being perfect. It was about acknowledging mistakes and making a conscious choice to be better. As the days went on, Jonah's relationship with Zoe deepened. They found themselves spending more time together, both professionally and personally. Their business meetings turned into long conversations about life, about society's expectations, and about their shared dreams for a better future. Jonah found himself listening more than speaking, his old habits of dominating the conversation slowly fading away. But not everyone was happy about the growing bond between Jonah and Zoe. Charles Wentworth, Jonah's business partner, made his feelings clear. One afternoon, as Jonah was leaving the office, Charles pulled him aside. "I don't know what's going on between you and her, Jonah," Charles said, his voice low and tinged with disdain. "But you're risking everything. You're letting her change you, and I can't stand by and watch this happen. She's not the kind of woman you should be involved with." Jonah's eyes narrowed, his anger rising at the familiar words. The same prejudices that had been instilled in him since childhood resurfaced in Charles's voice. For a moment, Jonah wanted to lash out, to tell Charles exactly what he thought of his archaic views, but he held back. He had learned in his time with Zoe that responding with anger would only fuel the fire. Instead, Jonah stood tall, his voice calm but firm. "I'm not going to apologize for who I've chosen to spend my time with, Charles. Zoe is more than just a woman. She's a force, a leader, and if you can't see that, then you're the one who's out of touch." Charles scoffed, shaking his head in disbelief. "You're making a mistake, Jonah. Don't let her fool you." Jonah didn't respond. He simply turned and walked away, leaving Charles's words hanging in the air. For the first time, Jonah felt unshaken. He had made his choice, and he wasn't going to let anyone, especially someone like Charles, dictate his decisions. Jonah's heart was racing as he stood in front of the packed conference room, staring out at the crowd of executives, business leaders, and industry giants. His mind was a whirlwind, but there was no turning back now. Today was the day that would define who he was, not just as a businessman, but as a man who had learned to live by his values rather than the expectations of others. The room was silent, awaiting the next speaker. Jonah could feel Charles Wentworth's eyes on him from across the room, the weight of his disapproval palpable. But Jonah had long stopped caring about Charles's opinion. He wasn't here for validation from the old guard. He was here for something far more important. Zoe stood beside him, calm and composed as always. But Jonah knew that beneath her serene exterior, she was just as anxious. This was not just another corporate event. This was the moment that would either confirm or break the progress they had made together. Jonah stepped forward to the podium. His gaze flicked briefly to Zoe, and he saw her giving him that small, reassuring smile that had become a symbol of everything he had fought for in the past few months: respect, partnership, and love. "Good afternoon, everyone," Jonah began, his voice steady but firm. "Today, I stand before you not just as a businessman, but as a man who has learned to see the world through a different lens. A man who has come to understand that the value of a person is not defined by their race, their gender, or their background, but by their actions, their character, and their ability to lead." Jonah paused, his heart still pounding but his voice growing stronger. "In this room, we've all worked hard to build our companies, our empires, but I've learned something recently, something more important than profits or quarterly reports. I've learned that true leadership doesn't come from the size of your bank account or the title on your business card. It comes from how you treat people, how you uplift them, how you stand by them when it's difficult, and how you defend them when others won't." He glanced at Zoe, who stood with her arms crossed, her posture confident but her eyes betraying a deep well of emotion. She had been the one to show him the importance of empathy, the power of vulnerability, and the strength that came from standing together. "I'm sure some of you are wondering why I'm saying all of this," Jonah continued, his eyes scanning the room, meeting the gaze of a few of the skeptics who still hadn't quite let go of their biases. "The truth is, I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. I've lived by a set of rules that told me who I should be, who I should love, and who I should respect. But I've come to realize that those rules were wrong, and I've learned to challenge them." A few murmurs spread across the room, and Jonah could sense the unease. He wasn't just talking about business anymore. He was talking about something more fundamental, about society's expectations and how they often held people back, about how even the most successful men and women could be blinded by prejudice if they didn't open their hearts to change. "I'm proud to stand here with Zoe Montgomery, the woman I've come to admire, respect, and love. And I'm proud to tell all of you that the choices we make, especially those about who we choose to be with, define who we really are. Love isn't about conformity. It's about honesty and authenticity. Zoe is a powerful leader, and she has taught me more about true leadership than anyone I've ever met. I can't imagine my life without her in it. The room was now completely silent, and Jonah could feel the eyes of every person in the room on him, waiting for his next move. He could feel Charles's glare from across the room, but it no longer mattered. He had already made his decision. This was the new Jonah, the Jonah who wasn't afraid to live authentically. "Zoe," Jonah said, his voice softening as he turned to her. "You've shown me that the greatest strength is not in how much we can control, but in how much we are willing to change, how much we are willing to love. Thank you for that." Zoe's eyes glistened with emotion, but she said nothing. Instead, she stepped forward and placed a hand on Jonah's shoulder, a silent but powerful gesture of support. Together, they stood, united. The room was still for a moment, and then, slowly, a few heads began to nod. Charles Wentworth stood up from his seat, his face hard but his lips pressed into a thin line. He said nothing but simply walked out of the room. Jonah didn't need to hear Charles's words. He knew where he stood now. As the meeting continued, Jonah felt the weight lift off his shoulders. The doubts, the fears, the pressure from his colleagues, all of it seemed to fade away. He was no longer bound by the chains of societal expectations or the limitations of his old biases. He was free to live the life he had always wanted, free to love who he wanted. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories about personal growth, love, and transformation. Have you ever had a moment that changed your life? Let us know in the comments. Share this video with someone who needs a little inspiration today. Weeks passed, and Jonah and Zoe's relationship continued to blossom. The world outside the conference room may not have fully accepted their union yet, but Jonah no longer cared. He had made his choice, and in doing so, he had freed himself from the shackles of his past. The couple faced challenges, of course, press coverage that was both supportive and hostile, industry peers who still couldn't fathom their relationship, and even some personal struggles with family. But through it all, they faced it together. Zoe's leadership in her company continued to thrive, and Jonah, now more confident and sure of himself, used his platform to advocate for diversity and inclusion in the business world. Their relationship became not just a love story, but a symbol of change, a symbol of how personal transformation could spark a larger movement toward equality, respect, and understanding. It wasn't long before Jonah, with Zoe by his side, proposed to her in a private moment, away from the public eye. Their wedding was a simple yet beautiful ceremony, an intimate affair with their closest friends and family. It wasn't about the wealth, the extravagance, or the headlines. It was about their commitment to each other and to the values they had come to share. The love between Jonah and Zoe was more than just a romance. It was a testament to the power of empathy, to the possibility of changing the world one person at a time, and to the belief that love transcends all barriers, even the ones we don't realize we've built for ourselves. As Jonah watched Zoe walk down the aisle toward him, the smile on her face reflecting her own journey of transformation, he knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning of their life together. And in that moment, Jonah felt something he had never experienced before: complete peace.